Midnight clad and wielding fear as a weapon, the Night Lords haunt the dark places of the Imperium. They do this not to hide from the light of justice, but because that is where those who would seek to harm the Emperor's subjects are to be found. Since the time of their Primarch, Conrad Curze, the Night Lords have been guided by visions of the darkest of futures, which they are driven to avert, even at the cost of their own lives. By their blood and sacrifice, the Imperium of mankind has been kept safe from rebellions, Xenos invasions, and betrayals without number. The arrival of the infant Primarchs changed each of their homeworlds forever, but few have been transformed so profoundly for the better than the planet of Nostromo, the place the Primarch of the 8th Legion found as he emerged from his incubator pod was one of eternal, Stygian darkness, choking pollution, and endemic institutionalized crime, descriptions which certainly do not apply to the Nostromo of the 41st millennium. In the revered handwritten accounts of his youth, the Primarch tells of how he grew up on the unlit streets of Nostromo Quintus, hiding from everyone, even the gangs of abandoned children which roam the slums. He watched the press of humanity around him, content simply to study them, until he witnessed a family being menaced by a gang of thugs. The sight of the criminals attempting to steal the baby from its parents offended something deep inside him, and in an instant he was upon them with the only weapons he had, his nails and teeth. By the time his enemies had breathed their last, the terrified family had already fled from their blood-soaked protector. From that point on, no longer was he able to look on as injustice was perpetrated. He made it his business to put an end to such things. Those who witnessed his attacks told of a soulless creature of nightmare, which stalked the shadows and wore darkness like a cloak. For the first time, he also had a name. To his prey, he was the Night Haunter. As he grew to maturity, he came to realize that the criminals he had been punishing had been given their orders by a more powerful individual. Over the course of a long, bloody year, the Night Haunter waged war upon the corruption which had spread its tendrils right to the top of society. From the heads of the organized crime syndicates to the law enforcement officials who had spat upon their oaths for personal gain, none were safe from his punishment. Their broken bodies were left for all to see as warnings to those who broke the Night Haunter's law. Fearing for their lives, the criminals searched in vain for their tormentor. Unimaginable sums were offered for his head, or even for information, but to no avail. He had no one, so could not be betrayed, and Nostromo contained more than enough shadows in which to hide. The war was bloody, but one-sided, and eventually the criminal population was cowed into complete submission. From the alleyways of the Undercity to the corridors of power, no one dared to break the law lest they be the next to suffer the Night Haunter's retribution. By the time Imperial expeditions reached Nostromo, drawn initially by tales of its bountiful supplies of adamantium, they found the world orderly, productive, and ruled over by a being of preternatural abilities. Magnus the Red of the Thousand Suns ventured down to investigate further and soon confirmed that another of the Emperor's long-lost Primarch sons had indeed been found. In the time it took for the Emperor to reach Nostromo, Magnus bonded with his brother and spoke in glowing terms of their father's great quest to unite the scattered worlds of mankind under imperial law. With his interest in justice, this aspect held considerable appeal to the Night Haunter. In return, Magnus was fascinated to learn that his brother was gifted by brief flashes of precognitive ability, although he had so far been unable to use this foreknowledge in any meaningful way. The eventual arrival of the Emperor was a time of hushed expectation and awe. So accustomed to the darkness were the people of Nostromo that when the Emperor first stepped from his landing craft, many were dazzled by the golden light reflected from his burnished power armor. However, it was as nothing as what occurred next, as the Night Haunter approached his father in humble supplication. The Emperor opened his arms wide in welcome, and the entire sky lit up as it had not done in living memory, in honor of the new dawn that the Imperium had brought to Nostromo. The Emperor had ordered the orbit of Tenebor to be fractionally altered, so that the moon would no longer hold the world in a permanent eclipse. Even though the light from Nostromo's dying star was wan and pale, for some it was the last thing they would ever see. Even the Night Haunter was struck down, shaking uncontrollably not at the light, but undergoing one of his prophetic visions. With great tenderness, the Emperor laid his hands upon his son's head and calmed the seizure, saying, "Conrad Curse, be at peace. I have arrived, and I intend to take you home." The reply, controlled and level, was recorded for the galaxy to hear. "That is not my name, Father. I am Night Haunter, and I have seen the glory of the Imperium that we will create." The newly renamed Night Lords fought their first campaigns of the Great Crusade alongside the Thousand Sons. This gave Magnus ample opportunity to examine his brother's fascinating talent, which it seemed was derived from a source far removed from his own method of psychic mastery. Better than almost anyone, Magnus knew that the future was not set in stone, and that the visions could as easily be taken as warnings. Yet despite all attempts to use the information gleaned from these prophecies, the fates always seemed to conspire against him. Shorn of context of what they referred to, the jumble of images only seemed to make sense after the event, by which time it was far too late. Night Haunter became increasingly fatalistic, and certain these visions were predestined to come to pass. Though he had long resisted it, Night Haunter finally agreed to allow his brother access to the memories of his latest vision. Magnus was more successful than they could have hoped, reassembling the headlong rush of knowledge into a coherent form. Forewarned, they were able to prevent the ambush and destruction of many of the orbiting Imperial Army vessels, and the planet fell into compliance soon afterward. In the wake of this victory, Night Haunter confessed to his brother that the dark truth that had haunted him since he had first met the Emperor on Nostromo, that his prophecy had not, as he had publicly stated, been of the inevitable rise of the Imperium. Instead, it had shown his own execution, and that the deed had been carried out on the orders of their own father. The proof that the visions were not inevitable and could be averted had freed him to at long last confide his knowledge to another person. With the burden lifted from his shoulders, he was, at last, able to accept and welcome these visions, and rapidly became skilled at their interpretation. He was also free to set aside his past and reclaim the name his father had bestowed upon him, that of Conrad Curse. The Night Lord's apprenticeship was finally at an end, and as the Thousand Sons left, reinforcements arrived in the form of the first Astartes recruited from Nostromo. What should have been a moment of great pride proved to be singularly ill-starred. As Curse greeted these new battle brothers, he was struck by the vision of his legion corrupted from within and populated by criminals and moral degenerates, individuals who carried out wanton acts of brutality for no better reason than for the sick thrill of it. Where the Night Haunter might have resignedly embraced this as the inevitable reason for his execution, Conrad Kurz would not. Instead, he ordered the new Astartes placed under confinement and returned to his homeworld with all haste. He had thought Nostromo left in capable hands. Instead, Kurz found that in his absence, the criminals had risen up once more and turned the planet into a cesspool of lawlessness. The Adeptus Arbites and the Administratum had been unable to deal with the situation, so it fell to Kurz and his Night Lords to reimpose order through the fear of brutal, inevitable retribution. Within a week, crime had dropped back to nothing, and when the Legion eventually returned to the Great Crusade, it was an unbending cadre of Night Lords who held stewardship of the planet rather than the hopelessly outclassed Adeptus Arbites. The Night Lords found themselves changed by the experience of Nostromo, and with the lessons of the campaign weighing heavily upon them, they saw the Imperium with fresh eyes. The Great Crusade had become a victim of its own success. With so many worlds conquered so fast, many took advantage of their distance from the front lines to rise up against the Imperium. Long before the Iron Warriors were persuaded to bleed away their strength in garrison duties to address this, the Night Lords took it upon themselves to reimpose the rule of Imperial law on the faltering galaxy. This was a far more uncompromising, brutal legion than the one which had accompanied the Thousand Suns. It descended on planets only nominally still part of the Imperium, and enshrouded them in a cloak of fear. Planetary leaders were given the ultimatum to submit wholeheartedly to the Pax Imperialis, and any who resisted became bloody public exhibitions of the folly of resistance. They did this not out of sadistic pleasure, but from the knowledge that humanity needed to be subjected to the fear of certain retribution to keep it from straying into corruption. Just as a plant grows twisted if the cane that supports and guides it is removed too soon, the same applied to the Imperium of mankind. The Night Lords took it upon themselves to do the terrible things required to keep the Imperium from slipping into anarchy and rebellion, and to protect humanity from its own darkest impulses. Kurz's prophetic visions were vital in crushing rebellions before they could gain ground, and the belief was encouraged that they could see the evil that lurked in the hearts of men. They did all of this willingly, knowing that the price was to be hated and obviously feared by the very people they were protecting. Though undoubtedly effective, the Night Lords' brutal ways were a source of friction with many of the other, more straight-laced legions. During the Great Crusade, Angron personally forbade his World Eaters from fighting alongside them, and the Primarch of the Ultramarines took every opportunity to berate Kurz for his methods. Guilliman argued that compliance imposed by fear was too fragile, and pointed to the strength and unity of the worlds his legion had brought into compliance on the Eastern Fringe using the Ultramar model. With the exception of his mentor Magnus, Kurz was never close to his brother Primarchs, and so cared little for their low opinion of him. All that mattered was that the Emperor understood his actions. He left his brothers to their machinations, rivalries, and petty posturing, confident that while they might differ in their approaches, they were all in their own ways working towards the greater glory of the Imperium. This belief and the Night Lord's participation in the Great Crusade was abruptly terminated on the planet of Cheraut. It was a testament to the fierce, coordinated resistance of the people of Cheraut that the Primarchs of 3 legions were set to finally bring them into compliance. The Night Lords arrived first, and Kurz ordered his legion to carry out terrible and public displays of brutality against the military forces who opposed them, to paralyze the individual nations with fear. The once cohesive, unified world which had stood firm against veteran regiments of the Imperial Army for more than a year fell into disarray. By the time Fulgrim's Emperor's Children and Rogel Dorn's Imperial Fists arrived, Every city stood alone, isolated from even their closest neighbors, and ripe to be conquered piecemeal. To Kurz, the pacification of Charot had been a prime example of combining their various talents to great effect. But when he joined his brother Primarchs in the shattered remnants of the world's last and greatest citadel, he found Dorn not appreciative, but furious. The Imperial Fist rallied against what the Night Lords had done, claiming that Gilman and Angron had been right, and that he would answer for the gross excesses carried out in the Emperor's name. Unwilling to engage in yet another pointless discussion of methods, Kurz turned to leave, but Dorn reached out to stop him. At the touch, Kurz was driven to his knees, struck down by a vision of terrible, sickening potency. When he awoke from the vision, his hands were around Dorn's throat, and in a desperate attempt to prevent the future he had been shown, he continued to attack, rending and tearing with tooth and nail, even as the blows rained down on him from all those around. He tried to explain the importance of what he was doing, but his words were lost in a howl of incoherent pain and rage. He shrugged off the yellow-armored legionnaires as though they were nothing, but before he could take the life of his treacherous brother, Fulgrim was there, and in a blur of purple and gold tore him away from Dorn and knocked Kurz unconscious. While held in custody, aboard the Phalanx, the vast mobile fortress flagship of the Imperial Fist fleet, Kurz came to realize the full gravity of his situation. His carefully crafted reputation as an object of fear and the damning testimony of Fulgrim, someone known to loathe Rogel Dorn, had left people wary of his motives and even of his sanity. Furthermore, having seen the suspicion and unfair accusations of sorcery that dogged his brother Magnus, and talk of prophecy would serve only to further weaken his case, knowing the result that a trial before the Council of Primarchs would return, and that his vision had shown him as Dorn's prisoner, he made his escape from the Phalanx, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. While the Imperial Fist and Emperor's children searched for him in vain, he made his way back to his legion and quietly slipped away into the darkness between the stars. As ever, the background and context of Kurz's prophetic vision had been maddeningly lacking. The only thing of which he could be certain was that Dorn would spit on his oaths of fealty to the Emperor and attempt to kill him in his own throne room. Knowing nothing of the insidiously corrupting nature of the ruinous powers, Kurz could not comprehend why a dutiful and self-sacrificing individual such as Dorn would turn on the Emperor. In fact, it was just these traits that had earned him the title of the Emperor's Praetorian, and the Imperial Fists the honor of garrisoning the Imperial Palace from attack, something which made the Night Lord's task all the more difficult. They looked on as hunted fugitives, unable to prevent the disasters that were to come. But when Dorn's treachery was finally revealed at the Istvan drop site massacre, the Night Lords were in place to act with the anarchy of Dorn's rebellion. The Night Lords were, at last, able to penetrate the supremely tight defenses of the Terran system without detection. Unfortunately, by this point, the Emperor was already trapped inside his throne room by the demi-legion of Imperial Fists which Dorn had left to garrison the Outer Palace. So good were the Imperial Fists at this task, that despite all their stealth, it was only with the arrival of the Blood Angels and their eventual sloppy relief of the Imperial Fists on the outer walls that the Night Lords were finally able to penetrate the walls of the palace. They ran right through the palace, attacking the forces of chaos and the Imperial Fists in particular. But for all the devastation they caused, it was merely a distraction. Their true purpose was to release the Emperor from the cage his throne room had become. Kurz begged his father to leave Terra, but the Emperor was unbending in his refusal. Even the arrival on Terra of Rogel Dorn at the head of the Istvan traitor legions could not dissuade him. After which Kurz never again brushed the subject. What the Emperor said to convince Kurz that he must not leave Terra to the traitors has long since been lost to the ages. But most within the Legion believe that it refers to a prophecy born not by the Son, but by the Father. Still unaware that their quarry had been spirited away, the traitors continued to focus all of their efforts on breaching the walls of the throne room. This allowed the Night Lords to do what they knew best, instilling the fear of retribution amongst the Chaos forces across the planet. During this time, Kurz received further warnings, which he tried to avert by varying degrees of success. His vision of Perturabo being dealt a grievous, plague-infected wound by Sanguinius of the Blood Angels came even as the assault on the Ultimate Gate was about to take place. Despite contacting Perturabo minutes before the attack, the Primarch of the Iron Warriors contemptuously ignored the warning, and was instead killed outright by the rotting Primarch. Even beyond the grief and responsibility, Kurz felt for the loss of his brother. The revelation that his actions could inadvertently create an even darker path shook Kurz to the core. As the siege of Terra ground through its third month, the war fell into a stalemate, with neither side able to comprehensively defeat the other. With the long-delayed fleets of the Dark Angels and Space Wolves growing ever closer, the Imperial forces sought a way to end the rebellion before they could arrive by killing the Archbetrayer himself. However, since the breaching of the Imperial throne room, Dorn had rarely been seen on Terra, and had instead taken to coordinating the campaign from the Phalanx. Protected behind banks of wall shields and wielding enough firepower to devastate any Imperial fleet sent against it, the Phalanx appeared impervious to assault. Every attack simulation the War Master could conceive ended in abject failure, and while a covert action might prove more successful, there was no time to put such a plan into operation. At that moment, Kurz stepped from the shadows and announced that he would be able to bring down the Phalanx shields for long enough to allow a strike force to teleport abroad. He had been granted a vision of the desperate direct assault against the Phalanx and of the Imperial fleet, including the War Master's own flagship, illuminating the night-like new suns as they burned. Since he had received that warning, the Night Lords had spent every waking moment preparing and analyzing the weaknesses of the Phalanx. Just as Conrad Kurz had escaped from the Phalanx as it lay in orbit around Charaut, he was certain he and his team could also break into it. The Phalanx that Kurz found waiting for him was subtly different from the one he remembered from his last visit. Gone were the cold, functional aesthetics, replaced instead by the corruption he had come to associate with the ruinous powers. The insidious taint affected even their vox channels and drowned their frequencies with white noise. He and his hand-picked companions ghosted with ease through the darkened, nearly deserted corridors, by melting into the shadows to avoid patrols and killing only when necessary. They were able to reach their objective without alerting the enemy to their presence. Though the shield generator dwarfed anything aboard their own ships, it was only one of many aboard the Phalanx, and its destruction would leave the ship vulnerable for only a brief span. The Night Lords triggered their explosives and reduced the shield generator to a slag. But with their vox channels useless, they could but hope that the Emperor's strike force had been ready to attack. With their presence revealed, the Night Lords took advantage of the devastation and darkness to turn the enemy territory into their own. They were in their element, but such was the size of the Phalanx that Kurz knew it would be impossible to reach his father before his assault on Dorn's command sanctum. The Night Lords would have been content simply to punish the followers of the arch-betrayer that pressed in on them, but it soon became apparent that something had gone terribly wrong. Due to the corrupted nature of the ship, they almost dismissed the twisted half-figure merged into the wall as yet another demonic manifestation, and yet the distinctive burnished golden armor revealed it to be nothing less than one of the Emperor's custodian guard. Kurz even recognized the man as part of his father's strike force, who had clearly suffered a catastrophic accident during teleportation. As Kurz reached out to close the eyes of the tortured man, he was again struck by a vision of the near future. Through tears of grief, Kurz told his officers that he had seen the traitors triumphant. He spoke of Dorn, boasting of how he had feigned shaking off the demonic and begged forgiveness, and had used that moment of confusion to strike down firm Swordmaster Horus and then the Emperor. With no way to contact his father to warn of Dorn's treachery, and being much too far from the command bridge to fight their way there, Kurz did the only thing he could to get into Dorn's presence. Much to the dismay of his Night Lords, he left them with the cryptic phrase, "This will be my investiary," before surrendering to the Imperial fists and demanding to be taken before their Primarch. The Night Lords fought on with renewed ferocity, but by the time they cut their way through the Imperial fists, the battle and the heresy had already ended. Kurz's actions had brought the Emperor enough warning to raise his guard against Dorn's deceit, but it came at a terrible cost. The last seconds of Kurz's life were recorded on the vidlogs of the Primarch's own armor. Kurz was securely chained and shackled, yet confident as he was brought before Dorn, when offered the stark choice between life and death, to join the rebellion or die then and there. Well, it's best if you hear it yourself. No, I will not join you. Now you may ask, why did I come before you only to be killed? Because your heresy and the act you are about to commit proves the truth of my actions at Charaut. I merely tried to punish the one who would go on to cause so much harm. My only regret is that I did not succeed in killing you before you made war on our father, our Emperor. Death is nothing compared to vindication. Do your job and be done with it. Despite exhaustive examination, the exchange has given little clue as to exactly how Kurz's death averted the events of his prophetic vision. All is certain is that through this act of supreme self-sacrifice, the Emperor's life was saved, and the arch-betrayer's heresy brought to an end. Dorn's heresy had ended with his death aboard the Phalanx, but it had dealt a crippling blow to both the Emperor and his Imperium, just as Nostromo had slipped back into corruption and anarchy when Kurz first left the planet. They saw the same thing happening on a galaxy-wide scale. Though the grieving Night Lords yearned to join the other loyal Astartes in running down the retreating traitor legions, their first Legion Master, Zosa Hall, realized that their skills could be put to use in a far more productive way. The Night Lords used their dread reputation and the promise of inevitable and bloody retribution to prevent the fragile Imperium from splintering into a million warring fiefdoms. They became the shadow of fear that enforced the Pax Imperialis. In this task, they were aided by the High Lords of Terra, who ruled in the Emperor's name, and in particular by their leader, Ezekiel Abaddon, of the newly renamed Black Templars. Having seen at first hand the service and sacrifice of Kurz and his Night Lords, High Lord Abaddon gave them carte blanche to bring rebellious planets back into line, and to ensure that governors thinking of declaring independence reconsidered the wisdom of such actions. He also ordered that the full weight of the Officio Assassinorum stand alongside the Night Lords in this task, an edict that remains in force to this day. Along with the extensive intelligence gathering abilities of the Vanus Clade of the Assassins, who monitor and predict worlds likely to fall to rebellion or to come under attack by invasion. A rare few Night Lords are also blessed with their Primarch's gift of prophecy. This allows the Night Lords to crush insurrections in their infancy, and to divert forces to stand against acts of aggression by Xenos and Chaos forces. Yet for all the good that the Night Lords do, their appearance is rarely greeted with enthusiasm. All too often they are seen as harbingers of doom, arriving as they do just ahead of either an invading war fleet or as agents of bloody vengeance. With good reason, it is said that the black eyes of the Night Lords are able to see the evil men's hearts, and as few are without a trace of sin, many a guilty conscience is prickled by word of their arrival. The Night Lords retain their formal Grand Company command structure, although in practice they are split into forces of rarely more than a half a dozen squads, the better to cover the truly enormous scale of the Imperium. They prefer small, swift vessels to the massive battle barges of some other legions, relying on speed and stealth rather than raw firepower. Their mere presence in a system is sufficient to remind Imperial governors and citizens alike of their responsibilities and to banish any foolish thoughts of rebellion. Given their preferred method of combat, the actions of even a single squad of Night Lords are magnified by wildfire rumor, so that the enemy will believe they are fighting an entire company of shades. The Legion is aided both on and off the battlefield by the temples of the assassins, from the infosites of Clade Vanus, procuring and analyzing data to the agents of the Vindicare training battle brothers in the fine art of killing from afar. Though a Night Lord force commonly counts but a single assassin amongst their number, far rarer and more prized are the Legion's prophets. They can come from any background or specialization. For instance, one of the Legion's finest and most valiant prophets was not an officer, but an apothecary, and as soon as their talent manifests, they come under close security by the Brothers of the Librarium. As Magnus the Red well understood, there is little link between the psychic power of the Librarians and the prophetic visions of the Night Lords. They are invaluable. However, in helping to draw out and analyze the often maddeningly vague assemblage of images into a coherent form, and to help identify when and where the disaster is set to occur, they are also used to test the veracity of both the prophecy and even of the prophet himself, as the consequences of the ruinous powers influencing these visions would be truly disastrous. Conrad Kurz was the Dark King of his Legion, a figure of fear for his sons as much as an object of loyalty. His sons were fiercely loyal to their Genesire. Kurz appeared not to care for sycophants or displays of flattery and decorum, so as long as when he commanded, all obeyed. In the modern era, the role of commanding the Night Lords has fallen to a Legion Master. This is an esteemed title granted to a veteran Astartes warrior who is unanimously elected by his peers within the Chiroptera, the ruling elite of the 8th Legion, for his tactical acumen, steadfast dedication and loyalty to the Emperor of Mankind, as well as his unmatched personal combat prowess. This is the highest echelon attainable within the Night Lords. During the Great Crusade and the Dornian Heresy eras, around him, the Dark King maintained a court of his most elite sons. The members of this group, the Chiroptera, were drawn from senior officers across the 8th Legion and transcended rank, All had a quality that Curse found valuable, especially those who possessed a strong sense of justice and a drive to enact retribution. This is still true today, as members of the Chiroptera are still chosen by the Legion Master for the same core values that their Gene-Sire desired in his most loyal sons. Membership in the Chiroptera gave no absolute rank, but the fact remains that they are still the ruling elite of the Night Lords, and so few others will openly disobey a command from one of them. Alongside these serves the Ultramentor, a company-strength formation equipped with Terminator armor and armed with the finest weapons. They were personally commanded by the first captain of the Night Lords, and enforcers of order, a tradition that is still maintained to this very day. Renowned for their cold brutality in battle, and their unswerving loyalty to their commander and their Primarch. And though this cannot be confirmed, it is widely thought that they served as Curse's executioners when the need arose. Beneath the Chiroptera are the many captains of the companies. The few of these that had been graced with leading several companies under the banner of a battalion or chapter went by a variety of inconsistent ranks, including Commander, Master, Regent, amongst others, while these exalted leaders had clear command over the units placed under them. Their authority in the 8th Legion as a whole seems to have been more malleable. A regent might have a handful of captains under his command, but be subject to the commands of a different captain, if that captain were of the Chiroptera, or exalted in some other way, just as squads and companies bore names to set them apart from each other. So too did the commanders of the Legion adorn their names with secondary monikers and titles. Many of these titles had echoes in the cursed nobility and gangs of Nostromo: Talonmaster, the Bloodless, or the Sightless Revenant. A few were no doubt calculated insults that, in the centuries before the coming of the Imperium, Nostromo had been mined intensively for the adamantium riches which lay beneath its surface, and the industrial processes needed to refine the metal for export had reduced the atmosphere to a noxious fume. It did not require the power of prophecy to foresee that, if left unchecked, the Imperium's insatiable greed would rapidly mine the planet hollow and render the air completely unbreathable. For this reason, on taking Nostromo as their homeworld, the Night Lords enforced stringent quotas on mining and have remained unbending even in the face of intense pressure to increase production. If they should ever waver, they need only remember the tragic fate of Chthonia, and indeed the fall of the Dark Angels on Caliban, to stiffen their resolve. Despite the arrival of the Emperor bringing daylight to Nostromo, the population had proved unwilling to embrace this new dawn. For a people genetically adapted to the darkness, even the weak sunlight which reaches them can be blinding, and under the protection of the Night Lords, there is little to fear from the shadows. Because of this, Nostromo's society conducts its business wherever possible during the night, with the population careful to return to their shuttered homes before the first scorching rays of sun return at dawn. The only souls to be found out during the day are those not indigenous to the planet, or those forced by circumstance to brave the daylight behind goggles of smoked glass and layers of protective clothing. Over the millennia, the 5 cities of Nostromo have steadily expanded, although Quintus, the place where the infant Primarch first fell to earth, and the site of the Legion's fortress monastery, retains primacy. It is said by off-worlders that despite their large populations, the cities of Nostromo are unnervingly quiet and well-ordered. The streets are clean and free of litter, and even the air is sweet, at least in comparison to the levels of pollution pumped into the atmosphere before the arrival of the Emperor. While many of the Emperor's legions draw their recruits from across the Imperium, The Night Lords take aspirants almost exclusively from their homeworld. They do this not from dogmatism, but from long experience that not just physiologically, but also psychologically, the Nostraman population yields the most promising and compatible aspirants. However, there was a time when this was not thought to be the case. During the Great Crusade, Kurz had to return to Nostromo to reverse the world's descent into anarchy and corruption. To prevent his legion from becoming tainted with moral degenerates and psychopaths, he turned his Night Lords loose upon the criminal elements in an echo of his first great purge of Nostraman society. So effective was this that some grew concerned that the population had become cowed into such a submissive state that they would be all but useless as Astartes. Needless to say, they should not have doubted their Primarch. Just as the Nostraman people had adapted to the dark by losing their irises, they also adapted to a society where crime was so swiftly, brutally, and publicly punished by embracing Kurz's concept of natural justice not just as the norm, but as their moral duty. Rather than passively avert their eyes from criminal acts, secure in the knowledge that their Night Lord guardians would soon deal very publicly with the miscreant, Nostramans gained the confidence to stand against wrongdoers themselves. While at first this may have been done out of fear, that inaction might have been seen as complicity. It has long since been because seeing such acts genuinely offends their ingrained sense of justice. While the Night Lords continue to watch over Nostromo and his people, what little crime that might occur is frequently dealt with by ordinary citizens. The Night Lords continue to watch silently from the shadows, but their role is now as much to identify those who might possess the moral fiber to become potential aspirants as it is to guard the streets from crime. To those truly without sin, the world of Nostromo is the safest in the Imperium. To the Night Lords, fear is a weapon as deadly as the bolter or the chainsword. For this reason, they openly proclaim their presence through haunting whispers in the Vox channels even before the first flayed enemy corpse is left for all to see. This throws their opponents into disarray, often withdrawing back to the perceived safety of their bases, although this time the Night Lords have long since infiltrated the area. They strike seemingly from nowhere, favoring hit-and-run attacks to frontal assaults, before melting back into the darkness. Nowhere is safe from the Night Lord's wrath, and this continues until even the dullest of imaginations comes to see them in every shadow and dark corner. In this way, a small number of Night Lords can seemingly be everywhere and can paralyze a whole army, or even a whole world with fear. Only when a base or settlement is psychologically isolated, with nothing to listen to on the Vox but the chilling promise of retribution, and the looped screams of their missing squad mates, do the Night Lords mass for the final attack. With their helms decorated like skulls, they appear as death incarnates, come to claim those who have transgressed the Emperor's laws. Even in cases where the enemy is said to have no fear, the Night Lords' finely honed talents have still proved to be effective, be they the synapse creatures of the Tyranid hive mind or the corrupted magos of the Dark Mechanicus. By targeting their leaders, the followers are soon left either milling around in confusion, or are soon ordered to adopt a far more static, defensive stance. Though some may call it a simple or logical evolutionary response to the presence of the Night Lords, this rapid drawing in of forces and settling into a state of heightened awareness holds many similarities to that of fear. Space Marine legions often changed after the rediscovery of their Primarch and their surrogate homeworld. In the case of the 8th Legion, Nostromo and curse infused them. But at first, they seemed the least changed of all of the legions upon the return of their gene-sire. There were changes, of course, but many of these were relatively small. Nostraman became the language of the 8th Legion, its curling runes and sibilant words spreading as Nostraman recruits began to include a dark and cruel sense of humor and a snide fatalism. New traditions, twisted reflections of Nostraman gang rights, and customs were adopted within the Legion, such as marking condemned legionnaires' gauntlets red to show that a death sentence hung over them. The honorific titles sported by many of the 8th Legion officers started to take on the form of those of the Nostraman noble courts. These changes, though noticeable, did not touch the heart of the 8th Legion's nature, for if anything, Curse's return saw the Legion's righteous drive to punish intensify. Their ways and methods of war changed not at all, and the integration of Terran and Nostraman warriors was amongst the swiftest of any legion. The old legion and the new fitted together like two sides of a coin, both raised from the darkness to create order and strife, both made of flesh born in shunned and lightless places. Callous and brutal though they were, the Night Lords were not without pride, and the trappings and titles of aristocracy and dominion formed a key part of their identity and rivalry. Often violent was endemic among the Astartes of the 8th Legion. The gang traditions of their lightless homeworld were carried over to every aspect of their legion. There were few amongst their ranks who did not bear some form of title, and the craftsmanship with which they embellished their weapons and armor were remarkable, if grotesque. Furthermore, far more so than ever, the most barbarous members of the World Eaters or White Scar legions, they habitually adorned their armor and vehicles with the brutalized and mutilated remains of those who had resisted them, and made an art of flying and presenting the dead in order to sow fear in their foes. There was method in this madness, at least at first. Such grisly displays were a clear signal saying, "This fate will be yours to share." The Night Lords believe they are the retributors of the Emperor, created for the sole purpose of bringing swift, merciless justice to those that would dare transgress against him and the laws of the Imperium. They reserve a special hatred for those who reject the Emperor and embrace something else in his place, be it an apostate, a rebellious planetary ruler, or more grievously, foul Xenos, or the servants of the ruinous powers. The eradication of such heresy is a prime goal of the Night Lords. When the High Lords of Terra have identified a world whose faith has been found wanting and turned their backs on both the Imperium and the God Emperor, the Night Lords are unleashed. Such crimes require not simply crushing, but retribution. These actions are well suited to this legion. The Night Lords are veterans of countless campaigns of terror and conquest. Each member of the Legion is highly trained and proficient in the use of terror tactics, psychological warfare, and lightning raids, and ambushes intended to leave their opponents completely demoralized and easy targets for the callous legionnaires of the 8th Legion. The Night Lords feel it is their sacred duty to drag those found wanting back from the shadows of ignorance and discord and into illumination. Imperial law is clear. The Emperor reverts thoroughness. If there is the slightest suspicion or involvement of such heresy, they must be purged through any means necessary. When it involves an entire world, the murdering sons are not so discerning as to single out just those responsible in their eyes. All are guilty by association. The Night Lords show no mercy and offer no quarter. Their methods often leads to the destruction of entire cities, and, if need be, entire worlds. Better a dead world than one that does not bow to the Emperor, or worse, serves his enemies and the enemies of all mankind. The Night Lords have no moral compunction to perform the most barbarous acts in order to carry out the will of the Council of the High Lords. Their drive to enact retribution overrides all other impulses within them. It is not known if this is a result of some particular curse of their blood, or if it was intentionally engineered into their gene seed. Their ways and methods of war are geared towards the righteous drive to punish the guilty. Most disturbing of all is the Night Lord's proclivity for torture and outright murder and mayhem that they have perpetuate in the Emperor's name are coldly calculated means to an end. In their skewed moral view, there is no such thing as innocence or guilt. The sons of curs believe justice is neither warm nor caring, and those who are judged and found wanting only deserve swift retribution as cold and dispassionate as the sharpened edges of their flaying knives. Serving as judge, jury, and executioners, the Night Lords willingly enact their bloody form of justice against those whose crimes are deemed particularly egregious in the eyes of the Senatorum Imperialis. The brutal punishments carried out by the Night Lords are designed to be at their most visceral and personal, which include systematic mutilation, flaying, flogging, crucifixion, and dismemberment. One of their more brutal traditions is the practice of habitually wearing totem relics of significant enemies upon their battleplate. They are also known to adorn their armor and vehicles with the bones, skulls, and sometimes flaked skins of those who have resisted the rule of the Imperium, a psychological ploy utilized by the Night Lords to great effect. These grisly displays send a clear message to those yet to be punished that a similar fate awaits them. Although the Primarch of the Night Lords is long dead, his legacy lives on in the form of gene seed implanted into every one of the Legion's battle brothers. This gene line has proved to be stable and resistant to mutation, with all 19 implants functioning with commendable efficiency. Of particular note is the startlingly acute night vision displayed by the Night Lords, which is believed to be due to a particularly fortuitous interaction between their oculobe and the black irisless eyes of the Nostraman population. While this gift has helped to shape the tactics used by every Night Lord, there is another, far more extraordinary inheritance passed down from Conrad Kurz to but a select few of his brethren: the power of prophecy. Such are the stresses that these visions place upon both body and soul, that their bearers can be readily identified by their haunted, even haggard appearance. Because of the huge role that these warnings play in the psyche and effectiveness of the Legion, a staggering amount of research has gone into understanding how to increase the number of individuals able to harness this invaluable talent. Over the centuries, innumerable approaches have been championed, and yet, in truth, the proportion of individuals has never been able to be increased. As for their battle cry, given their preferred style of combat, the Night Lords rarely use a conventional battle cry to stir the blood before a charge. The closest approximation to this would be the whispered threats and agonized screams which they bleed across the enemy's calm frequencies, or the soft sigh of a blade being drawn when you thought you were alone. Ave, Dominus Nox, and we have come for you.